No, I still see.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Go, Stephen.
No, on the say undoubtedly yes, because it just the plot thickens, as I say.
Okay, no, good. Yes, Kathy.
Um, no, I don't think that because I still think they're subservient um, to us, and they're sent as a servant from the Lord.
Okay. Hold on to that. I'm going to check in with you later, Kathy, if you still think they're subservient to us. But the question was more, are you noticing that they might have more responsibility and more depth to their being than you previously thought? In other words, is do they sound more complex in their makeup and in their activity than a general Christian assumption would have been?
Uh, Not yet.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Moving on. I want to try and very simply give a layout of how this, it is a hierarchy. That's exactly the word I should use. Let's look at a very simple, we're not going to go in depth into this, just a very simple hierarchical structure of how this looks. So I'm using this space in the picture here to represent eternity. And remember, when I say eternity, I mean not within time and space. So time and space would be at the bottom here. So there's the two definitive spaces we've got. So the first thing we look at is two of the classes of beings. Let's just use that, celestial beings that spend time in eternity, and that's the seraphim and the cherubim. Cherubim, if that doesn't sound familiar, that's actually the original Hebrew for cherubim. Okay, this is the Hebrew version of it, and I'll show you why I'm showing you that. I'm going to show you a quick video now, and I hope the audio will be fine. You can, well, it should be, so let's see. This is from the Bible Project. I'm not saying everything they do is right. I'm just choosing this little bit because I think they depict it nicely enough and they explain it simply enough to give some value. So have a look at this.
We've been talking about spiritual beings in the Bible, and we've looked at how God is in the heavenly realms, but not by himself. There's a whole staff team that the Bible calls the Divine Council.
But in the Bible, there are still more beings in the spiritual realm, like the cherubim and also the angels.
So let's talk about them. Okay, first, the cherubim. These are chubby little babies with wings, right?
No, you gotta get that image out of your head. Cherubim, or in Hebrew, cheruvim, they're way more fascinating. They're described as hybrid creatures, a collage of different animals, and every time they do appear, they look a little bit different.
That's intense.
Yeah, they're supposed to be intimidating. They stand guard at the boundary between heaven and earth. If you see them, you know you're entering the presence of the one who is above all and truly other.
The first time cherubim show up in the story of the Bible, they're standing outside of the Garden of Eden.
Right, the garden is God's temple residence, and so he places these spiritual bodyguards at the entrance so that the rebel humans can't get back in and ruin everything.
But the biblical story is about how God wants us back in his presence.
Yes, exactly. So this is why he chose the people of Israel and gave them the gift of a symbolic miniature Eden called the tabernacle, and then later the Jerusalem temple. In both of these spaces, cherubim were painted and engraved all over, reminding the priests that they are working in God's presence.
Now, if a priest went into the Holy of Holies, he would see there a golden box called the Ark of the Covenant, and on it were two cherubim. What's going on here?
Well, the biblical authors describe the ark as the footstool of God's throne, which the cherubim are carrying. Like we read in Psalm 99, God sits enthroned above the cherubim.
But there was no actual throne above the box.
Right, the Israelites weren't supposed to represent God with any physical image. But when the prophets had visions about this space, they saw Yahweh sitting on his throne.
Okay, so cherubim guard the sacred space, carry God's throne, but why do they look like animal mashups?
Well, they're symbolic representations of all the creatures of the earth, because they all belong to God. This is why in Isaiah's vision, all of the creatures are singing. Everything that fills the earth is God's glory.
Like a choir.
Yeah, through the cherubim, all creation offers praise to its maker.
Great. That's the cherubim. Now let's talk about.
Okay, so some key things you might pick up there, the mention of the cherubim. They spend time in God's presence. They are God's guardians, in fact, too, which is interesting. Kathy, I'm going to issue the first challenge to your worldview, and you obviously are welcome to challenge it right back. The cherubim are the ones who blocked the entrance back into Eden, and as we say, they block or protect God's holiness. Adam and Eve tried to come back, or they wanted to, and they couldn't, which automatically does imply that whatever those cherubim are, they are way more powerful than us. And I will tell you this much: if Adam and Eve tried their luck, they would have been killed trying to get back in. So that tells you that, and this is going to be difficult to process, right? That tells you that those creatures are jealous for God's holiness and protecting his throne. And now you might say, oh, but I'm a child of God. Yes, but they were created before you, and they still exist, and they still have their position. So they before us, they are superior to us in the sense of their proximity to God right now, and in their power, of course, the ability to quite literally destroy us if we set foot where we're not supposed to. So they are physically allowed where we couldn't be. You couldn't possibly go right now into the space that they are in. So there's already quite a distinct, clear ranking that shows you, yes, the top class of beings. When we start talking the separation from God himself to his creation, yeah, you've got these seraphim and the cherubim. They are guardians, and they stay in God's presence. You're not going to find them coming down to give a message or to help out with a war here on earth to protect Israel even. So there's a clear, distinct, way up there group that is these two in their space. And here's just some of the scripture that describes them. And from the midst of it came the likeness of 4 living creatures, and this was their appearance. They had human likeness, but each had 4 faces, and each of them had 4 wings. Their legs were straight, and the soles of their feet were like the sole of a calf's foot. They sparkled like burnished bronze. Under their wings, on their 4 sides, they had human hands, and the 4 had their faces, and their wings thus. Their wings touched one another. Each one of them went straight forward without turning as they went. As for the likeness of their faces, each had a human face. The 4 had the face of a lion on the right side. The 4 had the face of an ox on the left side. The 4 had the face of an eagle. It's from Ezekiel 1, verse 5 to 10. You saw in the video too that they mentioned the Ark of the Covenant, that these were covering the Ark, and they were embroidered on the curtains of the tabernacle, of the tent. Again, could anyone just waltz into that area? No. Even with it just being that, like made of gold and embroidered onto the curtains, anyone who wandered in there, even the priest went in there incorrectly, he died. And this is just a representation on the earth. I mean, but these the cherubim, are so important. They are molded in gold, which sounds strange when God says don't make images. And then they put on the curtains. This tells you you're not just dealing with anything. And the point is, again, it's not about them. It's actually about God. And when we mess with any of this process, we are actually undermining God. Even when we mean well, we'd be undermining him. This is how we've got to start filling in this gospel effectively. So I wanted to show you this, just so that you know this. This is in Mesopotamia, well, from Mesopotamian history. This might look familiar from Babylon and all of that. You have seen it outside some of the gates. If you look at this animal, this is, believe it or not, a caribou, which is literally cherubim. You can tell that the similarity, that's where the Hebrew gets it from, is from this idea. So now the question you ask yourself is God using pagan imagery to create his picture and his story? And the answer is, of course, no. When we look at the development of paganism and all of how that works, what do we know? It's the powers of darkness, not just Lucifer, because he's not on his own. He's not the mastermind of everything. It's the varied powers of darkness who have mimicked what God has done. So what you can be sure of is that they've taken what they know was in God's throne room, things they've seen, and they make, how can I say, like not hybrid, that's not the word, false imitations of that, if that makes sense. Now, I don't want to really get into this, but when you're looking at this, clearly this thing is a human head and it's got wings, which is not normally on a bull or a horse or an ox. You can see it's, and remember what I said to you in our first seed wall session, chimera is mixing of different species. Now, here's a question to ponder. I said this, what came first? Did we come first, or did the host of heaven come first? The obvious answer is the host of heaven comes first. So who is modeled after who? Are they modeled after us, or are we modeled after them? Who wants to tell me? What's the logical answer? Who takes whose form? Someone tell me.
We take their form.
Right. So automatically that has to tell you who's superior. They are. Now,
Yeah.
of course, depending on what you think superior means, um, you can get yourself confused with that. But the reality is they came before. They are definitely more powerful than us. Even the lowest class of them is more powerful than us. And that's a sobering thought for very arrogant human beings, which again is something Christianity is well known for over the course of its existence, is arrogance. So this is a good way to humble the story, so to speak. Okay, now I'm going to jump to Revelation and just inspire you to show you we can start understanding a lot more of Revelation too when we're getting these things in order. Revelations 4, verse 6 to 8. And around the throne, on each side of the throne, are four living creatures full of eyes in front and behind. The first living creature like a lion, the second living creature like an ox, the third living creature with the face of a man, and the fourth living creature like an eagle in flight. And the four living creatures, each of them with six wings, are full of eyes all around and within, without all around and within. Sorry, and day and night they never cease to say, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty, who was and is to come." This is what they do all the time. That's their job. So yeah, in Revelation, John is just simply seeing what you've already just had described to you. Now, these are just depictions, obviously, and we can't assume that any of these are absolutely certain. This is just artist renditions. But I thought I'd show it to you just because it's good just to get a general idea. Point is, is an hierarchical structure. These are at the top of that list. They are the most honored in the sense of being in God's presence. So that's quite a responsibility. And their job is quite to jealously guard God's throne. Now, here's another question for you to consider. So the animals that we find in the Garden of Eden and going out of the Garden of Eden, are these seraphim and cherubim, are they based on animals, or the animals based actually on them? And again, the logical answer should be what? The animals are probably a depiction of them, which then shows again that point of as it is in heaven, so on earth. It's the imaging of God even in nature, which I think is a powerful statement. So it's just something to think about. Okay, this next word, watchers, you're more familiar with this because if you've been around RBS at all, you've gotten some idea of this. We're going to extend your idea a little bit of it. So here we go, Daniel 4:13. I saw in the visions of my head as I lay in bed, and behold, a watcher, a holy one, came down from heaven. He proclaimed aloud and said thus. So Daniel sees a watcher. A watcher comes to talk to him. And here's Daniel 4:17. The sentence is by the decree of the watchers, the decision made by the word of the holy ones, to the end that the living may know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will, and sets over it the lowliest of men. Now, here's the thing that I want you to see in this. So now we know, I've taught you that watchers are negative because they were the ones that have sinned. There's that. But here it shows you there's actually watchers who are still holy. They're still doing their job. And not only that, to build on the divine council imagery, what you can see is that these watchers can even make decisions. The sentence by the decree of the watchers, they get to make decisions. And God can sanction. Of course, God will never be overridden. Okay, so you'll always be able to have a final say in some or other way that he'll act on. I'm not saying that God is overridden ever by any of these, but of course some of them have made mistakes with that and they've been punished for that. But the point is they get to make decisions, and that might shock you that there might be celestial beings other than God who are watching you and making decisions that might affect your life, even to the point of you dying or being kept alive. Now, that might be unnerving if you're only used to a Christian telling of the situation, but I think you can see with Daniel's story already, even if you don't know anything else, there's evidence of this. Okay, next one, Chief Sar. I'm saying Sar because that's the original Hebrew, or maybe the Aramaic, I should say, that fits in there, which means prince. You've heard of this word, okay? You know the princes, and you can probably imagine part of where I might go with this. But I'm first quoting from, yes, Enoch and Paul. Maybe now's a good time to tell you this, that the book of Enoch, or the writings of Enoch, is more important even to your Bible than you know. Now, maybe next week or the week after that, I might be forced to prove it to you, to show you just how many times, in fact, your gospel writers and Paul and Peter and Jude, all of them have actually quoted extra biblical literature that is now your Bible. Okay, you might need to take headache tablets that night when I show you that, but I will prove it to you so clearly there really won't be an argument to be had. But I know that it'll be very disconcerting and scary to the sensitivities. I've got to state that because I'm quoting 1 Enoch 40 verse 9, and people are going to do the Christian thing, I'm sure, either in your head or anyone who watches this recording might. But we'll see where that goes. Point is, and the third who is set over all the powers is Gabriel. So yeah, Enoch is telling you that Gabriel has authority over the powers. So this is a class of supernatural beings. And Enoch is suggesting that Gabriel, who we know from scripture, is over those powers. So already there's a class of authority that Gabriel has. Then we look at Ephesians 4 verse 12, which in itself is evidence. I'm going to show you into the future that Paul actually uses Enoch as a basis for what he writes, which might shock you. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, authorities, cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. I know Christians love reading that, and they tend to take it and then they squash it all into a little ball, and then it's either some little comic demon that's going to get sent running when they're singing their favorite gospel song while it's like it's set on fire from being so scared of you, or it's Satan, which they think they can exert, or the Satan, which they believe to be Lucifer, which is a mistake on its own, assuming that he's the only one there is. And they think they just automatically have this power, and that's it. It's all said and done. But when you stop and actually read Ephesians 4 verse 12, this is a pretty complex situation Paul is just haphazardly throwing out there. Or I'm saying haphazardly, that's not actually true. He's talking to people who he was teaching. Probably the kind of way I'm teaching you tonight. He was teaching these people so that in an occasional letter, he can talk so simply about it and just summarize it. So keep that in mind. And here we go again. First Enoch 42 to 4, 9 to 10 seems to clear up the matter as the 4 archangels, Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, and Phanuel, stand before the glory of the Lord, blessing the name of the Lord of spirits, saying praises before the Lord of glory, and then also referencing 1 Enoch 40 verse 9, verse 50, chapter 54 verse 6, 71 verse 8 and 9, and then verse 13 of 71 as well. So this is from First Enoch, and I know that might unsettle some of you. Gail has said she's read Enoch. More and more Christians are being exposed to it because the Dead Sea Scrolls are opening it up and actually showing, and scholars are now getting to see, oh my word, are you telling me that the gospel writers and Paul and Peter were actually quoting either directly or indirectly, literally taking content from Enoch? This is what's happening in scholarly circles. So whether you like that or not, brace yourself, because that's what's happening. And I'll explain more about why that's happening when we get there. Another one, yeah. Paul understood and presumed the Deuteronomy 32 worldview, rulers, archonton or archon, principalities, archaic powers, authorities, exousia, powers, which is the dynamis or dunamis, dominions, lords, kurios, thrones, thronos, world rulers, cosmocrata. These lemmas have something in common. They were used in both Old Testament and, in both New Testament and other Greek literature to denote geographical domain authority. Now, see that? Geographical domain authority, that's what we're getting into next week, which will explain this better. At times, these terms are used of humans, but several instances demonstrate that Paul had spiritual beings in mind. So, what the point here is, this is way more complex than your average, somewhat cheesy spiritual warfare, Christian get pumped situation where we're just going to start casting out things left, right, and center. This is way more complex than you could ever imagine, actually. And you do need to know it. For the most simple reason is it's in the text. It's there. And it's going to play way bigger part than you could have imagined. So where I've just said the chief Sar Prince, you can think Gabriel, you can think Michael, you can think Raphael, and you can think Phanuel, the two that we know best is Gabriel and Michael, because they happen to make it into not only the Old Testament Tanakh, spiritual warfare elements like with Daniel and so on, but even in the story of Jesus, Gabriel. So now already what you should be thinking, how big a deal is this Jesus that's going to be born, that a chief prince comes to announce who he is? And this is the kind of thinking I want you to get to better understand Jesus. So the next level, logically, if you've got the chief princes, which aren't many, we're going to move now to the princes. Now we're going to find more scattered, high up, don't get me wrong, but more scattered. They're still very powerful, as you're about to find out. Daniel 10, 20, and 21. Then he said, do you know why I've come to you? But now I will return to fight against the prince of Persia and go out. And when I go out, behold, the prince of Greece will come. But I will tell you what is inscribed in the book of truth. There is none who contends by my side against these except Michael, your prince. So notice something here. Someone comes to visit Daniel. If you think it was Gabriel in this case, it's not. If you think it was Michael, it's not, because Michael is noted here as the one who's going to help whoever comes to Daniel. So Daniel is actually visited by somebody other than these two chief princes. And that's an interesting thought about who you think that might be, that actually comes to speak to Daniel there. But then it says and shows you that even this this person within the divine council in the hierarchical structure needs help from Michael. If that doesn't tell you that the Prince of Persia and the Prince of Greece are not to be played with, then nothing will tell you that. These guys are serious and you don't screw around with them effectively, is what I need to say to you. I should probably also say, in terms of these princes, when you read Deuteronomy 32 verse 8, and it says that God gave the nations their inheritance, he put them, he numbered them according to the sons of God, which is these princes. And this is why you see the word prince for Greece, prince for Persia. And the original point was they were supposed to be guardians over that and rulers over that. That's the point. They were supposed to be. And obviously, as we know, they sinned and they mishandled that, and they harshly punished people at times and unfairly, overstepping boundaries, and that's complex on its own. So they abused their power, which they could. And when you find out how they can abuse their power, that might unnerve you even further, and you might be even more grateful that you've got Jesus. But let's see where we go next. The next one, here we go, is Malachim, messengers or angels. Now, this is the most common form of what people get to learn about the supernatural beings. And when you find that they come and give messages, yes, they are messengers in that way. And yes, Gabriel has done that, but that doesn't limit Gabriel to just being a messenger, because generally there is that class of messenger. Gabriel coming and give the kind of message he does tells you the incredible value, the incredible honor, the incredible status of who he comes to give the message about, because he's not just a normal messenger. So you should already be thinking, as you already know, Jesus is amazing. But I hope that elevates your perspective on who Jesus is, that a chief prince can come and deliver this kind of message. Should tell you a lot about who the message was for. Okay, here's another quote. Angel is in the English translation Hebrew malak, messenger. This language is intentional sonship language in the context of royal ideology, conveyed the notion of a high-ranking administration. The children of the king were not mere messengers, they outranked messengers. The sons of the king were an elite level of authority. They were extensions of kingly authority, granted that status by the king himself. The king's governance would include hundreds, even thousands of individuals, but authority was tiered. Family members, immediate and extended, had high ranking. Now, already, what does this tell you? It should prove already that not all angels are equal. Not everything is angels. Already, with what we've covered, it proves that. So there's hierarchical structure. Now, can anyone tell me, because you should know this, or some of you should know this, in Genesis 6, what is the name given to those beings that sinned, unfortunately, but what are they called in Hebrew? If you can't remember the Hebrew, tell me the English.
Darren,
Yeah,
I don't know. Ben Elohim, I think, or Benin Elohim.
Benai, yes, because Ben, as in my son's name, means son. So Benai Ha Elohim means they are the sons of God. And if you read what Michael Heiser wrote here, what does he say? The sons had an elite level, right? So they had more authority than just normal messengers. So what you can discover here, there are a class of angels. They're lower level, they're messengers. They definitely don't have the authority that other levels above them have, or to be in God's presence, or even to be on the divine council. They don't all have that. But here's the key thing, that highest ranking under the king would be his sons, logically, right? So let's think about it. God has sons. Who's God's most famous son?
Jesus.
You're absolutely right, but isn't that a little bit disturbingly exciting at the same time? Why is it disturbingly exciting that I can ask you who's God's favorite and most famous son? Why is that statement true but also strange to Christian logic?
Well, we would think of a son in human terms, the modeling, and then we would say that that would create a god and then a lesser god, which, excuse me for being shot, would almost infer that Jesus is lesser than the Father.
Right? And that's there, and that's true. And that's a good statement. You're right, because Christianity would struggle with that idea, and yet it's true. But there's another thing to think about. If God can have a favorite son or a most famous son, doesn't that automatically imply he's got more than one?
Yeah.
That's not Christian logic. Christians would be uncomfortable with that idea. And yet it's always been in Genesis that he's got sons. Here's the more crazy part.
Aaron,
Which sons are older, Jesus or the others?
There's a bit of a paradigm shift taking place because going back to the imagery of the heavenly beings before the creation was even made. And as you were saying, that could it be that the animals, that the form of the animals were modeled on the heavenly beings?
Yes.
So we have to rethink. We ultimately become very reductionist in our thinking, and you've said it before, where we use our earthly model of a father and his son and his offspring, like the firstborn having more
Yes.
preeminence in the family. We tend to see that as everything, and then we try and reverse engineer our human state back to an eternal state. You know what I mean?
Right.
But that gets lost in translation. So I think where this is going with me in my mind, it's really tipping the whole apple cart, because now you've got to rethink everything, and things aren't as you know, the whole doctrine of the Trinity and everything else seems to have to be rethought.
It does. You know, it puts lower on the rung, human beings. You know, it puts highest on the rungs, God and Jesus. Does that sound like a bad idea? I think it's a fantastic idea.
If
Sounds
anything,
right.
Darren, it should humble us
Right, that's what I want.
and remove our arrogance, because we
Yes.
always think we, in it's about keeping it in context.
Yeah,
But yeah, it should bring us to humility, because even when an angel appeared, I mean, the prophets and the men of old of the ancient times fell on their faces. So
exactly.
the holiness and the power that they exude should in itself put things in perspective.